So good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. We have a lot of content to cover. Authorized nonprofit reporting agencies. We're going to cover the federal, state, and levels. I'm so excited to be here. I start every webinar with this is my favorite topic. This is an important topic. I won't say it's my favorite. I'm not a big fan of the whole compliance stuff, but I do know that it is important, which is one of the reasons why, we're covering it today and why we covered it last week. Compliance is extremely important in this space. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to sit with me on a Thursday, my name is Amber Wynn. I am a philanthropreneur. I fuse the passion and commitment from philanthropy with proven business practices for long-term sustainability. My purpose, my function, my joy is supporting the most amazing people on the planet. That would be profit leaders. And I have done everything from emptying the trash to giving over $7 million annually as a funder. And in today's session, I am going to put on my hat as, usually I'm a funder, but I'm going to be more on the regulatory side today. So the way this works is if you have any questions, get my attention, Amber, whatever, and I'm happy to stop and answer any question. So nonprofits are regulated businesses. One of the biggest challenges in the nonprofit sector is people come into it without really understanding that a nonprofit is a business. It's a business with a philanthropic purpose. And because, that omission, they end up getting into a lot of trouble. Last week, we talked about how compliance is 50% of your fundraising strategy. And this is one of the reasons why, if in fact you don't maintain the compliance portion of the business, then you can get your 501c3 tax exempt revoked. And in a lot of instances, that is the reason why you get support. And on top of that, funders are not able to support you if you don't have your 501c3 tax exempt status. Because remember, funders report to the IRS as well. And so if they give out money to organizations that are not 501c3 tax exempt status, then they can get into trouble. So it's a whole domino effect. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how compliance impacts a nonprofit, which reporting agencies nonprofits report to, and how to prevent losing your tax exempt status. We've got so much amazingness coming. So when we talk about compliance, it's a whole bunch of things, right? Standards, regulations, policy, law, environment, rules. Last week, we talked about reporting. This week, we're going to talk about regulatory agencies. But before we jump in, I want you to just really take 10 steps back and think about some people who've gotten into trouble because they did not do what they were supposed to do in terms of filing their taxes, right? That's compliance. Here's what you should know. Al Capone was found guilty of tax evasion. Now, it is rumored that he killed over 450 people. They did not take him down because of the murders that he committed. They took him down because of taxes. And so when I say to you, we know that you're doing amazing work out there. We know that you're transforming lives, transforming communities. But the quickest way for you to be taken down is for non-compliance. And so we don't want that to happen. We do not want you to have your tax exempt status taken because that creates issues in your community, right? We want to maintain continuity in your programming, and we want to make sure that your organization is able to receive the funding that you work so hard to get. A nonprofit is a business governed by authorized agencies, by policies, procedures, regulations, checks and balances are put in place to ensure adherence to mandated rules and to maintain the public trust. That last line is extremely important. I'm going to step back 2 steps because a lot of times we step into these roles as an executive director or as a nonprofit key personnel, and really don't understand how nonprofits came to be. If you step into an organization that's already formed, then you miss a really huge part. So bear with me as we talk about the sectors. We've got the government sector, right? Government sector, who is responsible for making laws, enforcing laws, and protecting the people. Then we have the for-profit companies. They're responsible for making money, driving the economy, and technological advances. Who's serving the people? Well, the nonprofit sector stands in the gap between these two sectors, right? They're responsible for providing direct social services, for creating value systems, and we also serve as watchdogs. So we stand in the gap between both the for-profit companies and the government, and they know it, and they don't want to do the work. So to incentivize people and to incentivize companies to support nonprofits, they have been given the tax exempt status, right? So people don't want to do the work. They want to make money. They want to live a lavish life. And so the government said, listen, we don't want to take this on. We are going to give an incentive to society to support the organizations that are doing the work, which are the nonprofits. So that's how we are able to function. That's how we're able to get the grants and things of that nature, because the government has said, okay, we're going to give these organizations a special tax exempt status that should incentivize people to fund them because they're the ones actually doing the work in the community. As a result, they have to put in checks and balances, right? If we are incentivizing people to give money based off of this tax exempt status, then that means that these organizations need to function as public charities. They need to do what they need to do to maintain that tax exempt status, because at the end of the day, the purpose of a nonprofit is to benefit the public good. That means it can never be owned. And that means that we have to demonstrate to taxpayers that the monies that are going into these organizations are used for the purpose for which they were taken. So the IRS is the federal agency that governs the nonprofits, right? And they have rules, regulations. When people start their nonprofit, this is what I hear as a consultant. Hey, Amber, I got my 501c3. How do I get a grant? Or, hey, Amber, I started my nonprofit and I need to do this and I need to do that. And in that conversation, I hear a lot of times, that they don't know what a nonprofit is. So I'll hear things like, well, I'm trying to recruit for my board. How much do I pay them? Or, oh, I was thinking about having my for-profit work with my nonprofit. So how do I do that? So really clear indicators for me that they don't understand what a nonprofit is. A nonprofit is governed by the IRS. It can never be owned. If you are a founder and you started that nonprofit, you will forever, forever, forever be the founder. But it is not yours. It is a public charity. And if you paid attention to the forming documents, you'll see in your articles of incorporation, it states pretty clearly that it is a corporate benefit organization. It doesn't say a personal benefit. It says a corporate, meaning that it's there to benefit the public good. The IRS is the entity that is authorized to revoke your tax. One agency that's authorized to revoke your tax exempt status. Now, what I want you to be clear on, there's a two-step process when you start a nonprofit. You ask the state, hey, can I form a business? That's when they give you the articles of incorporation. It says you are a business. The next step is you say to the state, I formed a business. I am going to operate as a nonprofit. Once you get that, you then send that to the IRS and you say, hey, I'm a business. I'm operating as a nonprofit in said state. Will you give me tax exempt status? That's the 1023, right? So the IRS gives you tax exempt status, which means they have the authority to remove it. But it's important to understand that that first step is to say to your state, I'm forming as a business. And every business, whether you're an LLC, you're an S Corp, you're the C Corp, or you are a public charity, when you first file and you get your articles, you're saying to the state, I'm a business. I'm just going to tell you the real deal. It's so they can regulate taxes. If you form in the state, they need to know which businesses are in the state so they can determine taxes. Nonprofits are giving tax exempt status, meaning they're not taxed on the revenue that they bring in. So that is important to understand, because as I said, a lot of times people will come in and say, oh, my nonprofit, and not understanding that there's steps that happen, right? You are a business. It's just you are a business that has been formed as a nonprofit. If you lose your tax exempt status, you are still a nonprofit. Did you guys know that? If someone says, if one of these agencies says, we're revoking your tax exempt status, you're still a nonprofit. It's just an agency or a person can no longer receive the tax benefit because you don't have the tax exempt status. It's like if the DMV says, okay, I'm snatching, your ability, I'm snatching your driver's license. Well, you can still drive. It's just if you get pulled over, you're going to get ticketed because you have not been authorized to drive. So you're still a nonprofit. You just don't have the tax exempt status. And I'd like to think that most people in our world would write you a check because you're still a nonprofit. But the reality is there's an exchange, right? Funders are writing out the checks to tax exempt organizations so they can get that tax benefit. Last week, you guys may have seen this slide. There's no such thing as free money. I have people say this, oh, I want to start a nonprofit and get some of that free money. For those of you who are in the field, it's not free. Blood, sweat, tears. There is an exchange for that money. But what funders are looking for from you as a public charity are tangible, measurable, and quantifiable results in exchange for that money. Funders are partnering with you to help them accomplish their goals. And so as a result, they want proof that their funds were used as promised, proof that a positive change occurred, proof that they made a good investment. In the end, they want proof, right? Well, the same goes for the IRS. So the IRS is the authorizing agency. Funders report to the IRS, and then funders give money to the nonprofit. So the nonprofits report back to the funder, and then the funder reports to the IRS. There's no vacuum where the funders are like, you get some money and you get some money. They have to report to the IRS so that the IRS can make sure that the money is being used as it was designated. So there's this big old, funnel going. And because this big old funnel is going, we have to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are checked. You may see the president when he gives the State of the Union and he says, oh yeah, education is, increased by this much, jobs and da-da-da-da-da. Well, that's taxpayer dollars. He's reporting out to us. They're taking our taxes from our paycheck, FICA and all that kind of stuff. Sales tax. Where does that money go? Well, it goes to government agencies, right? And then government agencies then send it to the local agencies. And then those local agencies then partner with nonprofits. In order for the local agencies to say that they're doing their jobs, the nonprofit has to give them their information. And then the local agencies have to give that information to the government agency. And then the government agency, the president reports it out. So it's all connected. And if you have this understanding, then sometimes it's not so difficult to understand why your reporting has to be, on point. Because if we're saying, okay, this is why you were established to benefit the public good, how will we know? The only way we know is if you report it out. So that's what happens for taxpayer dollars, but it also happens for corporations, right? You have the board of trustees who are responsible for managing this money. Usually corporations give away about 5% of their revenue. And so the board of trustees are responsible for that. And the board chairman says, okay, well, this is how we're going to, designate this money. Well, then the nonprofit has to give that information back to the chair, who then reports it out to the trustees. And then they can account for at the end of the year when they do their annual report. This is how much we spent on, philanthropy. And within the philanthropy, it was youth development. It was, job workforce development or whatever. They have to be able to report that back out in order for them to be, approved by their governing entities. So it's a cycle, and we all work together. The same thing happens for foundation dollars, right? The monies come in and then it goes to the board. The program officer has a whole portfolio of nonprofits that they're responsible for, site visits, whatnot. The nonprofit does the work, but then they have to do the reporting. It goes back to the program officer, who stands in front of the board and says, yes, my nonprofits are doing amazing work, bada, 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 bada. And then it then goes back out. And so you have this annual report from the Ford Foundation saying, we funded this and we funded this. We've increased, this much in whatever area. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle. And so when we talk about, the reasons why compliance is important, on a micro level, it's important. But here you can see on a macro level, to be able to demonstrate that your organization is operating as a public charity, you have to maintain your compliance. Here's a statement that I want you guys to think about. People give their money and expect integrity. And when the integrity goes out the window, it just hurts everybody. It hurts the community, it hurts the organization, everything. It's just tragic. Directors of nonprofit corporations are charged with the important responsibility of conducting and overseeing the management of the corporation's affairs. While the day-to-day operations of a nonprofit can be and often are delegated to the staff, the directors maintain the ultimate authority over all corporate activities. Here's the deal. You want to maintain your compliance because, number one, you want to keep your tax exempt status. But when I tell you, you want to stay out of the headlines, you want to stay out of the headlines. It is really, I won't say easy, but, we are sensationalized society. And so once you're in the headlines, the funding community is small, right? It is so difficult to come back from that type of disparity. I did some consulting for the Sheriff's Youth Foundation here in LA, and there was some shady stuff that was going on. And as a consultant, I came in and I'm reaching out to all of these funders. So I reached out to Rose Hills, and she's like, yeah, come see me in a couple of years, Amber. I have to see that you guys have changed leadership, that you're doing more than just babysitting kids. I need to see some programs. And I was like, wow. And she's like, I'm the only one that's going to tell you, but you guys aren't going to get any big funding. So get that $10,000, show us what you do with it, and then come back, and you've got to really rebuild your organization up. And so when I went back to the leaders and told them that, he was like pissed. And I'm like, it's the public trust. If a funder is going to give you money and there's been mismanagement of funds, how does that look for them? So it all ties together, right? And what ends up happening, I tell you, 9 times out of 10, people with great hearts, great intentions, start nonprofits with no idea what they're doing. And so what ends up happening, they don't know what they don't know. And so they end up what I call the MSUs, making stuff up, right? I have to go in and clean up people's stuff. This is being recorded, so I'm going to say make stuff. That's not the word I use when I'm talking to some of my clients. We're making stuff up, right? So it's like, well, I didn't. They believe they own the organization, so they start doing things like making titles up. In the nonprofit sector, titles matter. I've had somebody say, oh, well, we've got an executive board. I'm like, yeah, that's your president, your treasurer, and your, no. The president, treasurer, and secretary, they're over there. We have an executive board, and we're the ones who really make the decisions. And I'm like, whoa, you can't make things up like that. The IRS has created the structure for a nonprofit. And so when you have 2 executive boards, not only the IRS, but funders are like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, well, we've got that board over there with the president, but then we've got the chair and the vice chair, just really creating things. For those of you who are presidents / CEOs, That's making stuff up. That's borrowing from the for-profit sector, right? In the nonprofit sector, the board of directors are responsible for hiring and firing the CEO or executive director. So if you are the president, which is the highest ranking person in the nonprofit, you're responsible for hiring and firing the paid staff. Highest ranking paid staff is the CEO. How are you then the president and the CEO? You're not going to fire yourself. But what's happened over the years is that people have started borrowing from the private sector. Oh, I'm the president and CEO. No, you can't be the president and CEO in a nonprofit because the president is responsible for hiring and firing the CEO. So it's a whole bunch of that stuff that goes on. And having been a funder, I can tell you, we don't have those conversations like we should because there are always more applicants than there are applications. And so we can use these things to eliminate organizations. So if you've been submitting grants and you know that you're a good fit for this particular funder, but you can't figure out why they won't fund you, it could be something as simple as you have the title of president and CEO, because then we make assumptions that if you don't even know that you report to the board, how can we trust you to manage our money because you don't really understand what a nonprofit is? If you have things like .com instead of .org, those are the things that are red flags for funders. You know, organization. You are a nonprofit organization versus a company. .com is company. If your email says Gmail instead of .org, all of these little things are telltale signs for funders to say, you don't know what you're doing. And therefore, I don't feel comfortable with giving you all of this money. If you're president and CEO and you've gotten money, I have people say that to me all the time. Well, I've gotten money as president. Yes, you have. But when we talk about big money and we talk about big investments, we're talking about sustainability. That's when those little things become like reasons why you don't advance to the next level. So when we talk about making stuff up, founders don't understand that nonprofits are regulated and that there are repercussions for breaking the law. Because even though there's regulation, the IRS, they don't have a lot of watchdogs that are coming after nonprofits. If you're in the public sector, if you got a lot of visibility, then there's a high likelihood that somebody's going to report you. But for all of these little small nonprofits, there's not a high likelihood that people are going to report you. But if you get reported, then that's it. It's over, right? So a nonprofit is a business. It's just a business with a philanthropic purpose. There's a statement that says, there's a legal principle holding that a person who's unaware of a law may not escape liability for violating that law simply because they were unaware of it, right? Ignorantia juris non ex ucasa, however you pronounce it. Basically, in the law, it says, just because you don't know it doesn't mean that you're not responsible for it. When you take on the role of executive director, then it is your responsibility to know what the law is and to abide by it. So if it comes to you standing in front of a judge and the crime is embezzlement and let's just say your accounting person has been embezzling money and it comes out and you'll say, well, I didn't know, Your Honor. This is what they're going to quote. They're going to say it perfectly in Latin. I can't. And they're going to say, ignorance of the law does not excuse you from it. And you're going to sit there, we're like, what? So in that space, it's important for you to research the law and understand those things that are important, because at the end of the day, in the nonprofit sector, you can be found guilty of fraud, mismanagement of funds, embezzlement, evasion. What does that look like? Well, in terms of compliance, the nonprofit is responsible for adhering to IRS rules and regulations, with providing funders with proof of the work, proving that the public charity is not a pass-through, meaning you didn't set up this nonprofit, this money's coming in, but it's going out for things that have nothing to do with benefiting the public good. You've just set it up because someone said, well, Amber, if you have a 501c3, I can give you this money. So I set up the 501c3. They give me the money. And we know what happens. They say that it's going for these refugees. They say that it's going, but it's really just a Ponzi scheme, right? That's why it's important for you to be able to document your success, to demonstrate your impact, because you can show to the funders, this is where your money's going. But if you're just taking the money and pocketing it, then there's no documented proof of success. And then the other purpose of compliance is to really look for inconsistencies. Those red flags are what authorizing agencies look for in order to say, okay, we need to dig deep because something's not right here, right? Non-compliance is failure to operate the organization as a public charity. That's non-compliance. People saying, oh, that's not how we do it. Then what you're doing is being non-compliant. You don't get to just say, well, this is my nonprofit and I'm doing it this way. That means you're a non-compliant. If you are personally benefiting from the organization, now, all of you are entitled to get a salary. You're personally benefiting, but you're working, right? We're talking about things like if your board members, they have a cleaning company and, you know, they're using the nonprofit to get contracts so that they can then be the clean. That's personally benefiting, right? If you fail to file your required documents, that's non-compliance. We're going to jump into that in 2 minutes. And failure to spend your funds as prescribed. Let me give you an example. You have 2 grants. One is from one foundation and the other is from the other. Well, you were supposed to get the money for this foundation on the 15th, but they said, oh, you're not going to get it until the 15th of next month. So you take the money from this foundation to cover the salary until this money comes in. That is non-compliance. You failed to spend the money that this organization gave you as prescribed. You think it's not a big deal because you're going to replace the money. But if it comes out that you use this money to cover, you know, the shortfall, you can be fined because that is not why that organization gave you the money. Who is legally responsible for the ethical operation of a nonprofit? Can you tell me? Throw in the chat. Who in your organization is legally responsible for the ethical operation of a nonprofit? Okay, Veronica, the board. Anyone else? Board. All right. So we have a bunch of smart people today. Yes, it is the board of directors. When I say to potential clients, I'm like, okay, so who's on your board? And they've got a barista. There's nothing wrong with the barista, by the way. They've got somebody who works for Foot Locker. You know, it's your board is legally responsible for the ethical operation of your nonprofit. So if you have people on your board, Mookie Pookie and Sheikah and them, and they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing, your organization may be in deep trouble, right? It is called fiduciary responsibilities. They've given it, you know, a whole legal name. You have the fiduciary responsibility of ethically running your operation, right? That means that they require that you have a conflict of interest statement, meaning I understand that my priority is to make sure that this board is operating to the highest standard. So much so, I'm going to sign a conflict of interest statement. The other thing is you are personally liable. That's not the case for a for-profit company, right? For-profit companies, corporations, they pay people to be on their board, and they also make sure that they are legally protected. For a nonprofit, when you sit on the board, you're saying, I'm standing up for this organization. That's why it is important when you are recruiting and you're recruiting high-powered board members that you have D&O insurance. Directors and officers insurance covers the personal liability of your board. When I used to sit on boards, I know what it takes to sit on a board, so I haven't sat on a board. I just resigned from my last board last December. The first thing that I do is ask for their budget. If I don't see a line item for directors and officers insurance, Amber Wynn is not going to sit on your board because I own a house and I own a car and I own a business. And if anything happens in your nonprofit, they're not coming after the executive director because the executive director is paid staff. They are coming for the board. And if you don't have insurance to cover your organization, they're coming after the personal assets of your board, which is why if you really want to grow your board, you need to make sure you protect their personal assets by having directors and officers insurance. Any questions about that? That is why funders ask you for board rosters. They want to know the caliber of board members on your board, because the board is responsible for the ethical operation of a nonprofit. If your board doesn't have some type of high caliber people on there, then that's going to be a reason why they don't fund your organization. All right. When we talk about ethics, we mentioned it before, pass through conflicts of interest, your bylaws. Your bylaws is your Bible, and it tells you how you're supposed to be running your organization. And if you are not following the bylaws, then you're not in compliance. When we talk about your board has the final approval, right? It used to be back in the 90s, before you could enter into a contract with the funder, they would have a one-sheeter, and it would like bullet point what the grant is about, and then it would have, approved by authorized personnel, which should be your president. I remember in the 90s driving around trying to catch up with our board president so he could sign this document so we could submit the grant, right? But when they ask you, they'll ask you for an approved budget. They're assuming approved by your board, because if your board approved your budget, that means they are committing to funding it. You can have, a proposed budget. You can have a budget from last year, but they're asking for your approved budget because it means that your board approved it. And then finally, consequences and repercussions, right? If you are non-compliant, if you're not submitting the paperwork that you're supposed to file, there are penalties, there are fines. You can be suspended and debarred. There's this agency called GSA, General Service Administration. When you go through SAM, when they make you submit through SAM, they will put you on a suspended and debarred list, meaning you cannot even apply because they know that you have been non-compliant. And then the most egregious, of course, outside of jail, is that they can revoke your tax exempt status. Now we get into the actual topic, which is the authorized reporting agencies. But are there any questions before we dive in? I just needed to do that setup because if you didn't understand how all of those things tied into a nonprofit being a business, then you miss understanding how it all ties together. And I don't like to just give topical information. I believe the more that you understand, then number one, for me anyway, I was the type of person, my mom had 8 kids and she couldn't stand me because she was from the era of children are meant to be seen and not heard. But I needed to understand everything. So when she said, do this, I'm like, why? I mean, because I'm your mama. But if you explain it to me, then that why becomes an understanding, if that makes sense. So people tend to teach how they learn. And so that's why you get all this information from me. I need to understand why. I'm not the type of person who's going to go jump off of a cliff. Why am I jumping? How far is it down there? What's at the bottom? Okay. Am I safe? Is it okay? So, and I just think when we talk about increasing capacity, it's important to know as well. If you only have half of the information, then you only have half of the solution. So any questions at all right now? Okay. And let's jump in. So there are 3 levels: federal, state, and local. As a nonprofit, you are required to file certain forms on all 3 levels. A lot of times people think, all right, I got my 501c3, that's it. And they never look back. What happens is if you don't file your 990s, everybody seems to know the 990s, but that's it. Well, I filed my 990s. Some people don't even know that they have to file 990s every year. Well, I didn't get any money. Doesn't matter. If you 50,000 or less, you file a 990 EZ, which is just a postcard. The purpose of filing is to let the IRS know, number one, you're still functioning, right? Well, yeah, I'm still functioning. I just haven't generated any money. If you don't file your 990s consecutively, meaning every 3 years, then they can revoke your tax exempt status, right? So people tend to know about the 990s, but you know, there's the Office of Inspector General, right? And that has to do with federal funding, FBI, DOJ. Then you have on the state level, you've got the Franchise Tax Board, the Secretary of State. On the local level, you have the Attorney General. And then, of course, private, you have foundations and corporations. We have things in our sector called watchdogs, GuideStar, Charity Navigator. They collect information as well. We consider them reporting agencies because they are there to maintain the integrity of the public charity. When we talk about the federal level, like I said, it is the IRS. The IRS is responsible for monitoring, reviewing, and approving. They also issue out fines. On the state level, you've got the State Franchise Tax Board. Remember in the beginning when I said your original form, the original formation of your organization is as a business. So when you got your articles of incorporation, they came through the State Franchise Tax Board because they want to know, how are you formed? Because if you aren't tax exempt, we got to collect taxes. So the State Franchise Tax Board ensures that nonprofits function as a public charity on the state level. They collect taxes required of all entities operating as a business in the state, and they also collect payroll. So you've got the EDD, and if your organization is generating revenue outside of the mission, the State Franchise Tax Board will impose what's called the unrelated business tax income. So let's just say the purpose of your organization is to plant trees, but you're making $200 million selling t-shirts. They're going to charge you taxes on that because that is not directly related to your mission. You may say, well, we're fundraising to support the organization. And they will say, yes, but that's not tied into your mission, right? If you are selling saplings, that is not directly tied to your mission. If you say a part of our mission is to increase the pipeline of tree huggers, tree planters, and so you have the people going out learning how to build a better ecosystem through blah, 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 blah. And a part of that is sales. So now they're selling the saplings and they're selling it. Then that's different because now it's tied into your mission. But if you are generating all of this money, corporate sponsorships, advertising, and it's over a threshold, generally speaking, it's 49%, then you will then start paying taxes to the State Franchise Tax Board. On the state level, you also have the Secretary of State, and they ensure that nonprofits function as a public charity on the state level as well. Every 2 years, you should be filing what's called a statement of information. And from the state, you will get something that says that you are active and in good standing on the state level. You'll get this request usually from the government, but some other entities are like, we need your SOI, right? So if you don't file your statement of information every 2 years, when you go into the Secretary of State's website, it will say, suspended, or it will say, that you don't have it. So this is one of the things as an agency that you too need to file. Then on the local level, you have the Attorney General. The Attorney General is responsible for ensuring that the nonprofit functions in a manner that serves the common good. Their role is to protect the donations and allocation of taxpayer dollars. So you'll see the AG out there saying, yes, we're here and we're really proud. We stopped this Ponzi scheme, but that also includes nonprofits, If you guys saw Black Lives Matter, they were all over the news saying that, you know, they were going to get their tax exempt status revoked. It was because they didn't file with the attorney generals. It's a $30 document. If you are fundraising in the state of California, you have to file with the attorney general's office. They didn't file, but the attorney general's office was like, listen, you don't file, we're going to revoke your tax exempt status. I have I have information for California, but in every state, your organization has to register with the attorney general's office. When does it happen? Well, in California, a nonprofit must register with the attorney general's registry of charitable trusts within 30 days after it initially receives any money or property. In some states, it's as soon as you register as an organization. But for California, it's as soon as you receive any money or property, right? It's the registration that is triggered by the receipt of money or property, as opposed to making a charitable solicitation. So in Minnesota, it may be, okay, well, we're going to do a run walk. So the first thing you want to do, register. Well, in California, it's not until the person pays their registration you do it. So it differs from state to state, but every state requires that you register with the attorney general's office to let them know that you're doing business in that state. So it has to do with soliciting donations. And this can be very, very expensive, right? We're going to get to this in a minute about online solicitations. I have $100 for the person who can tell me right now, don't go look it up. What does Penal Code 320.5 legally authorize? Tell me right now. You got 2 seconds. Anybody? All right. I did that before, and all of a sudden people were like, bloop, 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 bloop. They Googled it. So unfair. Penal Code 320.5 legally authorizes 50-50 raffles. Why is that important? Well, I don't know about you guys, but in our space, nonprofits do 50-50 raffles all the time. What's a 50-50 raffle? It's when you say, buy these tickets, buy 20 tickets for $5, right? And this big old pot of money is collected in about 2 or 3 hours. And they pull out a ticket and they say, okay, whoever gets this ticket wins 50% of the pot. That is illegal. That is illegal. 50-50 raffles are illegal unless the organization qualifies under Penal Code Section 32.6. I don't know why I have 5 over here. It's 0.6. And the only organization that is legally authorized, guess who it is? Major League Sports. So every time I go to the Rams game, I play the 50-50 raffle, because through the first 2 third quarters, that ticker's going up, ticker's going up, ticker's going up. And they are legally authorized. They're the only ones, baseball, football, to have a 50-50 raffle. Isn't that something? So the reason why you cannot have a 50-50 raffle as a nonprofit is because 90% of your revenue needs to go back to the organization. And if it's 50-50, then that's not happening, right? But if you're going to have a 50-50, then you need to file with the attorney general within 60 days of, okay, where is it? I'm going backwards. Within 60 days before the raffle. So what'll happen is people will do the raffle, 50-50 raffle, and then they register with the attorney general. You got to do it 60 days before. When you register with the charitable trust, they put you in this system so that if anybody report you, they're like, yeah, we already got them. You know what I mean? But the attorney general requires that at least 90% of the gross receipts from the raffles go directly to benefit the charitable cause. So that's why 50-50s are illegal. Any questions about that? Online fundraising. Online fundraising is really, really a big deal, especially since the pandemic, because that's where we switched to, right? For 2 years, we could only do virtual programming, we could only do virtual fundraising, and they were really slack on us because the whole world was just up in shambles. But if you do online fundraising, if you have GoFundMe's, if you have e-newsletters and you're sending out, click this button to donate, then guess what? You are supposed to register with the Attorney General's office. If you are doing Facebook fundraising campaigns or Instagram, you are required to register with your Attorney General's office. Any type of fundraising, your Attorney General's office needs to know about it. Yes, Roger.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting because
Mm-hmm.
I'm developing an app, and in the app, we'll have the ability for the persons on there to be able to give charitably to this
Mm-hmm.
organization, as well as selling merchandise, giving history of the company, who's on the company, who works, testimonials, reviews. It's going to be an app for the 501c3 here for Lifeline,
Uh-huh.
but we'll maybe try and patent it so that if other waging programming members want to come on, then they will have to, thank you, they will have to go through us. And so is that going to have to be registered with the Attorney General?
Yeah, if there is a way for someone to donate to your organization virtually, online, via technology, then you need to register with the Attorney General. And
Wow.
basically what you're saying is, listen, we are asking people for money because what happens is there are terrorists out there posing as, right? And they're getting money. And so it is the Attorney General office's responsibility to make sure that taxpayer money is being collected in a way that is supporting public charity and not for some, off cuff stuff. Here,
So, so,
go
so
ahead.
this is interesting because I'm spending a little bit of time on doing this with some other people
Mhm.
working with them. Is I need to get some insight. So if I have to file and register this with the Attorney General, basically all it is we're saying that we have developed an app for Lifeline or Colorado, et cetera, and we will be having people able to give charitably online
Yes,
through the app.
yes. Now here's where the problem is going to happen, and this is for all of you. If someone from New York decides to donate to your organization and you're in Colorado, then you need to register with that state's authorities. If
Really?
mhm, if someone from California decides to donate to your so technically you don't know where these donations are coming from. It's virtual, it's online, it's like GoFundMe, right? But the rule is whoever is donating to your organization, you have to be registered in that state.
So you're saying then that I would have to actually, let's say there's 5 states that we're working with Lifeline. I would have to have all 5 states. We'd have to
Yeah.
register.
Yeah, yeah, and it becomes expensive. It becomes expensive, and so
Yes, it
people
does.
typically don't do it. So what happens for GoFundMe, they they have systems in place that take care of that, right? They because what happened is you had this influx of, was it Indiegogo, Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and they were just woof, right? And so that's when this regulation came in, and it says, hold up, hold up. If you are getting, donations, so then those platforms would register with the states. But if you're doing it on your own, then you need to register. Now, what can happen is, let's just say you have an e-newsletter and people are donating, right? You can look at your metrics and you can say, well, we're only getting donations from Colorado, Nevada, and California. So you just register in those. And on your website, you can say, Lifeline is only registered in these 3 states. Colorado, Nevada, and California. If you're making a donation outside of this state, we're not authorized to receive money from you. That's what
Hmm.
that's what you're
Wow.
that's what you're supposed to say, right?
Woo.
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know because we're working on this, and I never heard that. That's interesting.
hmm And this is where people end up getting fined, right? We're like, oh, we see that you've collected over $20,000 from this GoFundMe account or this whatever, Facebook or whatever. Are you registered with the Attorney General? That's how it starts. When you're little and you're small, nothing really happens. It's when you get big and or somebody's mad about it and they report you, and then they're like, hey, are you registered? And you're like, registered for what? And then that's when the fines happen and things of that nature, right? So there are agencies out there who will do the registration for you. You can pick 6 states, you can pick 50 states, and it's expensive. It's about $7,000 for all 50 states. I'm like, yeah, it's about 6,900 and yeah, $7,000 for all states. But here's the thing: are you getting donations from Wyoming and Ohio? Are you getting, donations from New Hampshire? You don't know. So that's why, I always say run your campaign for about 3 months or 6 months and look at your metrics and see where you get the majority of your donations from, and just register in those, and then put on your the disclaimer saying we are registered in these states, right? But that I wanted to make you aware of it because people do online fundraisers all the time, right? Don't give me a birthday gift. Support my Facebook birthday thing. That's online, so you need to register with that on Instagram all the time. And I'm going to tell you, people tell me all the time, well, I've done it and I never. Okay, got it. Yes, right. Let's see, Anna. The donations have to be substantial. Yes, she's correct. So they need to be over $250. If it's under $250, you don't have to worry about it. The donations have to be substantial, so you don't have to register for de minimis amounts. But once you get recurring donor, even de minimis, you need to register. Also, for your app, if you sell it to other nonprofits, that could be unrelated business. Thank you, Anna. All true, all facts. This is why I love my community. I don't pretend to know all things. I know just enough to be dangerous. And I will tell you, I've had so many nonprofits say, oh, I just got word that my tax exempt status has been revoked from the Attorney General. Amber, what can I do? What happened? I was like, okay, breathe, breathe, breathe. First of all, go to the website, download the form. I think it's something 11, the name of it. CTNRP-1, right? At least that's what it is for California. Um, they're going to ask you for $30. Now you're in the system, but there may be a fine, right? There may be a fine, but generally speaking, you submit a form. They're going to charge you minimal amount, $30, $50, $20, and now you're registered and now you're legal, right? But when we talk about these other things, if you're making, like Anna said, it's reoccurring and it's a significant amount, then that's when you want to make sure that it's covered. But if your donations don't total up, you're like, oh yeah, we did this one fund and we got, $250, like what? But if you're getting like 2,000 and it's every month, and you just want to make sure that you're registered. So big level, big picture, Secretary of State, your statement of information, right? You want to file within 90 days after the filing of the initial articles of incorporation, and every 2 years after that. The Franchise Tax Board, you're filing your 199N e-postcard. If your gross receipts are under 50,000, you're going to file your form 199. If your gross receipts are greater than 50,000. For the Attorney General's office, you want to register with the Charitable of Trust, which means you're going to submit this form, register within 30 days of receiving your assets and funds, check your state for what their requirements are. For the IRS, this is the one that we are more familiar with. You file on the 15th day of May, right? Um, and if your annual gross receipts are up to 50, so if it's 50 or less, you're going to file a 990 in. If they're greater than 50, then you will file the Form 990. If you fail to file 3 years in a row, beginning in tax year 2008, it will result in an automatic revocation of your tax exempts. They're going to automatically do it. So then you're going to be put on this list that's on the IRS website that says tax exempt revoked, tax exemption revoked. And that's the first thing that a funder is going to look for. When they're doing their due diligence, they're going to put, when they ask you for your tax ID number, it's because they're going to the IRS website and you may have no idea because you thought your accountant was doing it. I hear that all the time. Well, I thought my accountant was doing it. Your accountant is supposed to file, but if they're not a nonprofit accountant, like I don't know how or what happens, but if it's not filed consecutively for 3 years, you will get your tax exempt status revoked. Now, for the local, in terms of like city, county, or whatever, you really should just do a cursory check just to make sure there's nothing that they're requiring nonprofits to do. Because you can get cited and you can get fined. Typically, they aren't authorized to revoke your tax exempt status, but you can get your tax exempt status revoked on the state level, which people didn't know. You can get it revoked on the federal level, which most people are familiar with, and then the Attorney General's office, which is typically on the county level. Any questions? You're welcome. Again, when you're doing all of this work and the work is good and you're transforming communities, you're changing lives, and then you get this letter that says, guess what? In pink and red, and it says, your tax exempt status has been revoked. It just upends your whole system because you have grants. Now those are in jeopardy, right? You have grants that are out you want to get funded for. Those are in jeopardy. So it is important for me to let you know as the leaders of your nonprofit that a nonprofit is a business on this level. This is why I say a nonprofit is a business with a philanthropic purpose, because there are still regulatory requirements of a nonprofit. And if you aren't in compliance, it's going to wreak havoc in your whole world, right? I'm just trying to help my community. I'm just, yep, all of that. And if you don't file these documents, they're going to snatch your tax exempt status. So, like I said, it was just important for me to let you guys know that these things are required on different levels. There is, I have what's called a nonprofit checklist, and it tells you what you should be filing on the state level, which is the Secretary of State and the Franchise Tax Board, the Attorney General, and the IRS. Again, if you want to take a screenshot of this, you can, because it has the URLs on there. Or if you want to drop your email and your name into the chat, I can send you it. It's just a one-pager. I have my nonprofits put it on their board where they have whatever the most pressing information is. I have them give it to their accountants. Listen, are you checking for these things to make sure that we don't get our tax exempt status, taken from us? But yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you guys want a copy of this video or any other video, then you are to email Mason at latinocoalition.org, because she is keeping a library of all of the videos. So if you can't make it, don't worry about it. You can go back and review the videos, and all of them are being stored in the library for you guys. So any questions? Anybody? Did you guys know before about the filing for all of the different levels? Okay. Yeah, it's pretty huge. And for me, I'm not an accountant and I'm not an HR person and I'm strictly nonprofit. And quite frankly, I learned about all of this because I've had so many people come to me saying, "What is this, Amber? They're going to take my tax exempt status." And the first time I was like, "How can they take your tax exempt status when it's the attorney general?" And then, after doing it for so many, I was like, "Well, they're authorized to do it, right?" And I'm like, "Well, how can the state take your?" And so for me, it's about letting you know in advance so that you can be like, "Hey guys, before we go down this road, let's do a spot check. Are we submitting our statement of information every 2 years?" And if you have a CRM, if you have a client relations management system, Salesforce, Blackbaud, any of those, my recommendation is once you get this document, is that you go to your accountant and you say, "Okay, put in our system when this is due." Right? So if you submitted your statement of information this year, you're going to submit it again in 2026. Put a date and make sure if you submit it May 15th, you do it May 1st, right? So that you have time, right? But when it's in a system and you have alerts, it's going to help you because you're juggling too many balls in the air. You got 13 balls. You're not thinking about filing a one-page document. So when you have this information, put it in your system, put it in your Outlook calendar, whatever is going to alert you. Okay, we got to make sure that we submit our 990s. They're due on May 15th. So January, February, March, April, we're going to start collecting all of our documents and making sure. That's the only way you can do it. There's absolutely no way, as executive director or whatever your role is, you can remember everything. You have to put systems in place that's going to help you remember. But you got to know what it is you need to know in order to be in compliance. So that was the purpose of today, to say, "Hey guys, got something else for you." But once those things are done, you know, you'll be good. You don't have to worry about your tax exempt status being taken. You don't have to worry about your grants being in jeopardy. You don't have to worry about paying back any money. So that's all I got for today. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out. We'll see you next Thursday. Thank you guys.